because sometimes the visuals are really important, and that's why I have my helpers to tell me when they can't see anything. So you can see here in the last federal election how Canada compared to other countries in terms of making people's votes count. And when you can actually see the picture, it's rather striking that in Canada, most of us elect nobody, whereas in most modern democracies, people elect a representative with their ballot. And this is just another way of showing the same thing. Okay, and this is the ad I was talking about from New Zealand, you know, encouraging people to vote in the election and just saying that votes are equal. So everybody's vote actually counts, and we can't say that here yet. And here are those numbers that I was talking about, people who cast ballots and didn't elect anybody, and these are federal numbers. But it's actually pretty common for about half of the votes to not elect anybody in Canada. Kind of seems to range from 49 to 52% of people electing nobody each election. Okay, and here's where I think I left off last time. So you can see the contrast here between the Bloc Québécois vote and the Green Party vote in 2008, and trying to understand why you know, why in this century this result should happen. You know, why people with certain values should get so much representation and people who share other values get no representation, because it's entirely based on where you live. And here again, we can see another example of this in 1993, where the Bloc became our official opposition, which is kind of hard to fathom when they don't really represent anybody outside of Quebec. And you know, one of the two oldest parties in Canada lost their official party status and went down to 2 seats, even though they got 16% of the vote. They actually got more votes from Canadians than the Bloc Québécois did. Okay, and here you can see another example of how distorted the results can be. So this is the 2011 election in Alberta, and you can see that 66% of people in Alberta in 2011 voted for Stephen Harper's Conservatives, but that got them 26 out of 27 of the seats, leaving one MP to represent basically every other point of view in Alberta. And this is one of the problems, obviously, with first past the post, is it can lead to, you know, one party sweeping every single seat in a region. And, you know, if you go over to Quebec, it was pretty much the same thing in that election, except in the other direction. Everybody in Quebec did not vote for the NDP in 2011. 43% of people in Quebec voted for the NDP, but that got the NDP almost every single seat. So one of the most disturbing things about first past the post that I think proportional representation really addresses is that with first past the post, a very small shift in the popular vote can lead to a huge shift in who holds the power. So you can see on this slide, hopefully everybody can see now, that, you know, over a few years, the vote for the Conservative Party went up by about 2%. But that 2% concentrated in a few swing ridings ended up taking them from a minority government to a majority government, when really the support among Canadians for that point of view hadn't increased that much. And this is why politicians spend most of their time focused on swing ridings. You know, and there was a study in the UK a few years ago showing that parties will spend up to 22 times as much money in a few ridings compared to, you know, not much in the safe seats. And of course, we have electoral finance laws to prevent some of that, but the same general principle appears about where the parties focus their time. So really, it's saying to you, like this product here, that you only really matter if you live in one of those swing ridings. And many of the safe seats, you know what the outcome is going to be before the election even starts. And we saw that magnified in this last Ontario election. So every election, there's quite a bit of strategic voting, but researchers like to point out that it's not as much as we who live this political stuff all the time think it is. You know, it can end up being, 3, 5, 10% of people who actually voted strategically. But this time in Ontario, it was a lot. And this statistic from the Ipsos poll showing that 3 out of 10 didn't feel good about their vote, really points to the problem with the first past the post system. And this is just an example of, what it's like to live in a fairly safe riding. So of course we know in the Ontario election, the Greens made it a breakthrough in Guelph, but this is the federal election. And this seat in Guelph has been Liberal for 25 years. And yet this is how people voted in Guelph in 2008. And, it changes a bit from election to election, but there's a great deal of diversity in that riding. And that is just not reflected in the outcome. And here we can see in the 2015 federal election how Toronto voted and what Toronto got. And as we all know, there was a huge wave of strategic voting for the Trudeau Liberals. So the how Toronto voted, a lot of those would also have been strategic votes. But now we have 25 out of 25 Liberal MPs in Toronto. And similar story in Atlantic Canada, 32 out of 32 Liberal MPs, and not really reflecting the diversity of that whole region. So this is kind of what it can feel like voting with first past the post. And I think this little poster about the drinks there, the Doug Ford election is this is that in a different way. So it's not just the distorted results, it's about, and the disregarded votes, it's about who gets all the power, and should that single party have all the power. And here you can see in 2011 how the results would have been different with first past the post in PR. And of course I say that with the huge qualification that when we have proportional representation, people will vote differently. There won't be as much strategic voting, very little to none. It really depends on the system. And people will be more willing to vote for parties that they haven't voted for before. But with those caveats in mind, you can still see that no party would have gotten 100% of the power. And you can think between 2011 and 2015, some of the policies that were passed by the federal government and how it might have been different if we had a proportional system. And same here in 2015, when the Liberals got almost exactly the same percentage of the popular vote as the Conservatives had before them. And again, 39% of the vote gave them 100% of the power for 4 years. And here's our new example from last week, where the Ford Conservatives got 40.5% of the vote, but that gave them 61% of the seats. And it's especially striking in this election. So, I mean, quite frankly, sometimes when the centrist party in the middle wins all the power with 39% of the vote, it's not quite as alarming to people right away, because obviously they pull ideas from the left and the right. But when you get a situation like in Ontario, where you have 3 parties promising things like dental care, pharmacare, increased minimum wage, environmental progress on carbon tax, and then you get another party who's promising tax cuts, canceling environmental programs, free beer, stuff like this, and that party wins, it becomes apparently more obvious what's wrong with the electoral system and why proportional systems work better, not because these policies on the left of the poster are better, but because they better reflect what the majority wanted. And sometimes the results can be really messed up, and we saw this in 1996, and we've seen it in quite a few elections in Canada where one party actually wins more popular support, but the other party goes on to form a majority government. And of course, when these kind of wrong winner elections happen, that often prompts a call for electoral reform, as it did in BC, which prompted the first BC Citizens Assembly. So again, most majority governments in Canada are not made up of don't have the support of a real majority of voters. In fact, Ontario is a striking example of that. 1937 was the last time Ontario had a majority government that was supported by more than 50% of the electorate. And what this means in practice is that power ends up getting concentrated at the top. And this, I think, is what bothers a lot of people. And we saw this, we saw this vividly during the 2016, 2017 electoral reform process, where the one party Trudeau had promised electoral reform, and then in the end he canned it, and he said it was my choice to make. And that illustrated the whole problem with first past the post right there in a nutshell. So proportional representation means, when you have 2 or 3 parties at the top, it's a lot harder to do that kind of stuff because you have more eyes on what's going on. So just to sum up about first past the post, some of the problems we have here, and I wasn't able to touch on all of them today because I want to give Steve lots of time, but, distorted results, regional polarization, adversarial politics, which we all, many of us have difficulty with when 2 parties who have a lot in common end up spending more time attacking each other because they're all fighting for that same voter. Policy lurch. This is a huge problem where, a government spends a lot of time and money getting us into one policy direction, and then the next government comes in and entirely reverses that, cancels all those programs, undoes all that, and then 4 years later we're around in the same circle. So that's a lot of waste of taxpayers' money. So how does PR fix it? So we're going to go through a little bit of the general evidence for proportional representation, that PR is very likely to actually make a lot of these things better. So the first thing I want to point out is that electoral reform isn't one issue. So, I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges we have with our cause, our campaign, is that people hear electoral reform and, unless there's something going on like Doug Ford, it tends to, become a snooze fest really quick for most people. They understand it as one issue, as some kind of a math issue. It's geeky, it's something to do with parties, but really what it's about is every single issue. It's about how we make decisions on every single issue that affects our lives. And this is just another way of saying the same thing. So the first thing to know is that most Western democracies use proportional systems. So over 80% of OECD countries, and Canada, the UK, and the US are really the outliers. In most OECD countries with parliamentary governments like ours, coalition arrangements or cooperative arrangements between parties are the norm. You can see how rare single-party majorities are, and even how rare single-party minorities are. So when you get a system where the parties know that it's in their benefit to cooperate, and to compromise and to create policies together, then they find ways to do that. And these coalition governments or, minority governments with supply and confidence agreements, various creative ways of working together are just as stable as our first past the post voting system in terms of the number of elections. So if anybody says we'll be running to the polls every year, that's just a myth. So one of the people that did the most research on this, and there's been a lot of research on this, one political scientist told me it's like pretty much the best studied area. The jury isn't really out. PR systems do better. That's a broad consensus. How much they do better, there's a lot of debate, but overall, Aaron Leipart did a study of 36 countries. He did it twice over 2 approximately 25-year periods. There's 2 editions of his book. He looked at about 16 different measures, and he found that countries with proportional representation outperformed the others on almost every single thing. And by the second edition of his book, I think it was 16 out of 16 for PR. And so here's a few things: higher voter turnout, more satisfied citizens, more women elected. I'd encourage you to read his book, very objective. It spurned a whole lot of research on PR. And so we put together nice little graphics just pointing out a few of the things that people might be the most interested in about proportional representation. So, fair results. faster climate action, higher youth turnout, 12% more youth vote in countries with PR. And here's a big one, PR and income inequality. So this is one of the most interesting things, that it's been replicated by about 3 different researchers now, that countries with proportional systems tend to have lower income inequality. And why is that? Is that because people have more power to influence policies that affect their lives? You know, the why is, you know, I don't know the why, but that would be a really good theory that's been put forward. And again, on environmental issues, proportional countries overall score higher on a wide range of indexes. They're ahead of us on developing and using renewable energy, and they're quicker to sign on to climate change accords and to actually act on them and keep their carbon emissions under control better. Finally, just to look a little bit at the idea of diversity. So sometimes when we look at our legislatures, they tend to look a little bit like this. A lot of old white men. And one of the things about PR is that it tends to elect more women, and not necessarily because there's quotas and things like that. Sometimes the parties do implement quotas, but it's the basic framework underneath it is more choice. So when a party has to run more than one candidate, they're more likely to offer you a diversity of candidates for you to choose from. When they only have to run one candidate, it tends to be the incumbent, who tends to be an older white male who gets to run in the ridings where the party can win. So by opening it up to more people to run, it provides a natural incentive for parties to offer us more diversity. And then when voters vote for that, we get a legislature that looks somewhat more like us. And just on a little kind of side note here, one of the things that we hear a lot, and I just opened the Vancouver Sun before this webinar and read about 3 paragraphs of some guy's long rant about how PR was going to destroy the economy in BC. So actually, you know, that's not true. So interesting fact, and you know, this may not be totally popular with people on the left, but corporate taxes are lower in countries with PR. And PR countries don't actually spend any more as a percentage of their GDP than we do, and they actually have lower national debt. So there, you know, I think it's hard to make a case that the economy is better or worse under PR, because it's a very complicated subject, and it depends on what you're looking at. But overall, there's really nothing behind the fear mongering that goes on with opponents about how we're going to spend ourselves into oblivion. So the most recent commission, obviously, the committee that we had, the federal ERRE, 88% of the experts who testified to that all-party committee were in favor of proportional representation. And you can see that 4% were in favor of Justin Trudeau's preferred system alternative vote. So what happened in the end is that I guess 88% kind of looks like a consensus to me. And all the parties were free to invite their experts. And this is what came out of it. And this is just a replica, really. We've had 16 commissions, committees, and assemblies now in Canada. We've probably got the world record on it. And the reason I didn't include the federal ERRE, I'll tell you why. This is the 3rd federal all-party committee on electoral reform. The first one was in 1923, then 1937, and now 2016. And those 3 were set up by Liberal governments following an election promise. And when you put incumbents in a room together and ask them what they want to do about the voting system, well, I think we see what happens. So those committees did not recommend PR despite hearing all the same evidence. All the experts recommended it, the public who would have testified recommended it, but the politicians have a little bit of trouble recommending a fair electoral system for us voters. But as soon as you put it to, you know, a committee or a commission that's outside of that, you can see that over and over and over again, proportional representation is recommended, and it's always the same 2 systems, mixed member proportional or single transferable vote or some variation of the 2. So again, there's no lack of consensus around that either. And there's actually been a lot of polls done over the years on public support for PR. So this is support for the principle. This isn't asking, about some specific set of mechanics. It's asking, do you think that 30% of the vote should get 30% of the seats? That kind of question. Or, should we move to proportional representation? And you can see very clearly that a strong majority of Canadians support that principle. And here I think we kind of talked about this. And so I'm ending off with here's some of our team in Kamloops who are out all the time canvassing and talking to voters about the referendum in British Columbia. And that is our next biggest chance in BC. So we're very, very excited about that. We're pleased with the question. We're working super hard, and we can do it. We can do it with your support, and that's why we keep on. Okay, so I'm going to ask Steve to come back on and do his presentation about New Zealand.
Okay, well, in theory, my microphone is on and the camera should be on.
Yeah, I see you.
You see me. All right, then.
I
cool.
do.
Then what have I done? Oh, yeah, change it to view everyone. There we go. Okay, good morning, everybody. It's Sunday morning here in New Zealand. And thank you, Anita. That's a great presentation. I had the good fortune to go through the slides last night, and so now I know what not to bang on about because Anita's already talked about it, so that's good. Thank you. Yeah, Sunday morning here. It looks like a good day so far, so you can look forward to that. I'm going to try and bring up my slides. I'm not really a slide fan, but this way I get to see my notes and you get to see them too. And what I'm going to talk about is kind of New Zealand's version of mixed member proportional, and that was implemented in 1996, and how that's gone over the last 22 years. I've been here throughout that period. I mean, I visit Canada frequently. I was there at Christmas and New Year, and I'll be there again in about a month for a couple of weeks. So I get there. I get to Canada frequently, but I've been in New Zealand since 1982 as my main place of residence. Okay, so let's go to my slides. Maybe Anita can tell me if this looks all right. I'm almost there. Hang on a sec. If I go to let me see. Sorry. There we go. Screen. Yes. Oh, so change presenter. That'll be me, right? And then show my screen. Okay. And slideshow. So can everybody see that? I'm got my eye on the questions here. Yes, good. Oh, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Catherine and Derek. Yep, awesome. Okay. So, all right, PR 101, New Zealand style. I'll hit enter on that. Just a quick overview. New Zealand's MMP system is, okay, let's not touch the mouse unless we really want to. I'm just trying to get rid of some of this other stuff. All right, there we go. Okay, now hopefully you can, no, just careful what you touch. All right, there we go. All right, so it's a unicameral system. There's no upper house, and that's the upper house that they did have was called the Legislative Council, I think, and it was abolished in 1955, long before my time. And it was, as far as I can recall, it was an unelected body, a bit like Canada's Senate, and they got rid of it. Okay, so that meant that all of the power was concentrated in the Prime Minister's office, and the voting system was first past the post. And that led to a situation where people weren't very happy about that, because the Prime Minister could, with 39% of the vote, sound familiar, people, do whatever he wanted. And it came to a head with Sir Robert Muldoon and the National Party government of 1981 to 84, where he was both the finance minister and the prime minister. So he had his thumb on all the big buttons. And anybody else in the cabinet who wanted to get anything done, he was basically acting like a dictator. He was access to everything. and people they felt that that was a danger really, and then they didn't feel adequately represented. So we ended up getting this MMP system as a result of a Royal Commission and the Labour Party losing 2 elections even though they got the most votes, and the outcome was that they recommended this version of MMP. And there are 120 seats in total. There used to be 99. It says unless there's an overhang, and of course an overhang would be where a party or an independent won a local seat, but either they don't have a party at all or their share of the party vote is too small for one seat to be proportional. So it sits alongside. So we've had as last term we had 121 seats. In previous terms, we've had 122 or even 123, just because the parties involved in winning those single seats didn't actually get enough votes to be counted proportionally. Okay, so they're in addition to. I mean, I'd prefer that it was expanded to be proportional, but the decision was to split the difference and just let them sit alongside the 120. The term of Parliament in New Zealand, because there's only the one house for a long time, it's only been 3 years, and that was seen as an important check on power. That if you don't like what they're doing after 3 years, you get to kick them out, and that was brought through from first past the post to MMP, and there was a referendum to extend the term to 4 years, and it was soundly, completely, and thoroughly rejected. Okay, people were very happy with the 3-year term. I have to say I agree with that. Now, the 120 seats, there are 64 elected locally on the general roll, which is voluntary. You can just go on the general roll, and they're first past the post like they always were. And there are 7 additional local electorates which are mapped over top of all the others, and that's the Maori roll. And people who are Maori, or I think if you actually decide to identify as Maori, whether you are or not, you can actually go on the Maori roll. And the number of seats there can fluctuate based on the size of the numbers of people on the Maori roll. So when MMP was brought in, there were only 4 seats on the Maori roll. And then periodically, I don't know however many years, they do a kind of a re-enumeration, and you get to select which roll you want to be on. And they just had one recently. So the number of Maori seats could change in future if the numbers drop or increase, depending on how many people opt to be on that roll. Okay, so that takes the total number of local seats to 71, and the remaining 49 seats are elected nationally via the party vote. And people call these list MPs, you know, but because it's the way it works is, I like to see it as a multi-member national constituency. And I personally, this isn't an accepted term broadly, but I refer to them as national MPs because they are elected from the entire country by everybody who supported a party, and they function as national MPs, particularly for small parties where they only have a few. They have to cover quite large areas, and whereas if they're a bit more numerous, then they can do things like open electorate offices and things like that. The PR threshold in New Zealand, there are 2 of them. One is if your party gets over the 5%, you get your proportion of the seats, or if you win 1 local seat, you are then entitled to have your proportion of the party vote. Most often, or maybe half the time, that ends up with that party winning just that 1 seat, and their share of the vote outside that seat is minimal, and they don't get any extra seats. There have been, like the ACT Party has had enough to win 2 seats with 1 proportional. There are a couple of other parties that might have had 1 or 2 extra seats based on the share of the vote, but usually it ends up being just the 1 local seat. But those are the 2 thresholds. Now, registering to vote is compulsory. There's usually a bit of confusion between Australia and New Zealand in this regard. You can be fined if you don't register to vote, but you don't have to. In New Zealand, you don't have to vote. If you don't vote, that's not a problem. Whereas Australia, if you don't vote, they'll fine you for not voting, in theory. Okay, so that's the bare bones of that. Now, the next screen is a little map. This shows the local electorates in New Zealand. And this is based on the most recent election in September 2017. The red areas are the areas held by the Labour Party, and the blue areas are the areas held by the National Party. And the National Party is basically the Conservative Party. And the Labour Party would be much like the NDP. The ACT Party is kind of a they broke away from Labor after in the 1980s, but they're actually absolute, raw of tooth and claw neoliberals. And they have an accommodation with National, where National stand aside in one seat in Auckland. In the upper left there, you can see that one little yellow dot. That's not far from where I live. I actually live in number 12, if you can see those numbers. But in number 10 there, the ACT Party win that locally, but their share of the vote is minuscule, so that's the only seat they get. But they have been a supporting party for National when they were in government. And that's the reason for the accommodation. It effectively gives National an extra seat. But I'll explain that as we go along. But you can see here also that most of the country looks blue, but the populations in those areas are relatively small. In the red areas, you'd probably have half the country's population, if not more. So the lower left-hand corner there is Dunedin, South Otago area, and Dunedin is a sort of a lefty sort of a place with a major university. The West Coast, the stripe down the left-hand side on the South Island, tends to be a left area because low incomes there and a lot of mining and union-based activities. Wellington tends to be Labour voters, and also Hawke's Bay area, again, you've got a little more industry and more unionized stuff going on there. And then Auckland, basically the red areas tend to be the lower income areas, and the blue areas tend to be the higher income areas. And there's a new thing coming through too, is that the blue areas in Auckland, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 1, 2, 3, now have very large Asian populations. Koreans and Chinese, 200,000 or 300,000 people, and the majority of them would vote National. They don't really have a liberal democratic background. They come from a very different political environment, and they tend to support National. Some people have argued that's why a lot of immigration was allowed from Asia for 10 years, because it was in effect a border gerrymander. But that's, you can debate that one until the cows come home. So that's New Zealand. Those are the local electorates. Now, the parties, I've gone to the Electoral Commission, and I've looked at the list of parties currently registered. Some parties which lost at the last election have deregistered themselves, and parties from previous elections who failed or were removed or disappeared, they have also deregistered themselves, so they're no longer officially parties at all. To be a party in New Zealand, you basically have to have 500 signed up members, and an executive and a constitution. And then you can be a registered party. So we've got the National Party, which is basically the Conservative Party, much like the Ontario, the Progressive Conservatives in Ontario. Small towns, rural base, and they're firmly in the neoliberal mold. Market forces, government doesn't like to do stuff, so they'll favor private trucking over public rail and that sort of thing. The Labour Party would be more like the NDP, strong roots in the unions, but because they're one of the two major parties, I'll say that they have liberalish moments where suddenly they're not very Labour at all and everyone's scratching their heads. But I'd call them fading neoliberals, because their experiment with neoliberalism in the 80s just about killed them. And there are people still in that party who didn't go to ACT, who are holding those views, the sort of Tony Blairite third way type people. They're a major faction in the Labour Party today, but I describe them now as fading neoliberals. So they're still supporting the TPP, but there's a lot of opposition in their own party, and of course from the Green Party as well. So, but they're still there with that. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a general fix on what they're about. The New Zealand First Party is really a breakaway from the National Party prior to its neoliberal period. It's led by Winston Peters, who was a protege of Sir Robert Muldoon, the guy I was talking about before, who was a quasi-dictator. But the National Party in those days was a sort of a Keynesian economic pump priming, tariff laid, laying tariffs on and all sorts of stuff. Very interventionist in the economy in the interests of promoting a local economy for the benefit of New Zealanders, was the way they described it. So they weren't in the globalist mode. They were very much about New Zealand first. And where Winston Peters broke away from them, he led this party, and he grabbed a reasonable chunk of the constituency of the old National Party, who firmly support that approach. He's a very populist character, Winston Peters. He's 72 years old now, and he's been leading this party since the early 90s. So he's long in the tooth, but he's a wily old lawyer, a lot of experience, and he says some outrageous things. And that does attract support and votes and attention in the media, but it's worked for him. He's the vote share for them has been anywhere up to 18%, depending on what election you're talking about. So, but he's also had some failures from making bad decisions about, and I'll talk about that. The Green Party is the Greens, with the usual priority on environment and social justice. They're part of the global green movement. They also in New Zealand use the male and female co-leader model, which I'm very much an admirer of. It's quite a good model. I can talk about that if anybody's curious. And there we go. Now and the next one is screen is ACT Party. I call them raw and tooth and clawed neoliberals. They're labor breakaway. They're the 5% flat tax guys and all that sort of stuff. With very little regulation on anything, and market forces all the way. They have had up to 9 MPs in the past, but for several elections now, they've not been able to manage more than one. The Maori Party was a breakaway Labour Party. They broke away from the Labour Party when there was a dispute over customary title to the foreshore, like the beaches, the coast, and seabed resources. The Maori had felt that those issues had never been addressed by the Treaty of Waitangi, and since then, which was the 1840 foundation document for New Zealand, and they always felt that when Maori came up against the colonists, the Maori always lost, and they saw the labor in Helen Clark's term back in the 90s, their formulation of the foreshore and seabed as a legislation as a result of a court case that Maori stood a good chance of winning, and the government at the time preempted that with legislation. And the senior Maori minister, Tariana Turia, quit the Labour Party and founded the Maori Party, and attracted wide support. They've had up to 7 MPs, and at one point I think they held, if not all, they held all but one Maori seat. So they had very strong backing on the Maori roll and had a lot of seats. Now they disappeared at the last election, and I can talk about that as we go on. And of course, the next party is the ALCP, the Aotearoa Legalized Cannabis Party, and their policy platform is pretty much exclusively legalizing cannabis, and they do attract some support. The Conservative Party is the most recent formulation of the family values conservative type party. It used to be the Christian Democrats or the Christian, I forget the exact name. They've had several incarnations over the years, most recently led by Auckland businessman. They were polling well in the polls until he ran into trouble having an affair with a former employee. It seems to be the way of such things. So moving on, we have the top party, which is the Opportunities Party, the creation of Gareth Morgan, a multi-millionaire businessman. He's a rationalist. He saw that parties were making policy for populist reasons or reasons that were based on preconception and prejudice. And he was very much in favor of promoting evidence-based policymaking. Now, interesting guy. He has his take on the world, and perhaps didn't understand there are several other evidence-based parties as well, like the Greens and to some extent Labor. So he was unable to get a lock on a lot of votes because people saw him as being redundant. He's preaching to the choir, and to some extent, and people already had votes committed to other parties. But he spent several $1 million, $2.4 million, and they got some votes. So, but he didn't get anywhere near as many votes as he thought he was going to. But interesting though, because it's the policy was a mix of neoliberal with populist stuff thrown in, and support for people who needed it. It was just a very pragmatic policy, and it attracted quite a lot of people from a lot of different directions. So from that point of view, it was a very interesting party. It's still there. Don't know that he's so keen on it, so I don't know where the next 2.4 million is coming from. But it still has a lot of supporters. The Mana Party is a Maori Party breakaway. Hone Harawira, who was a Maori Party MP from a family with a history. The Harawira family has a history of being stroppy and independent, and he's no exception. And he had a falling out with the Maori Party, the rest of the Maori Party, and he won his Maori Party electorate for at least one term. And created the Mana movement, it's called. And most recently, the people supporting Mana were elements of some very old parties, like what I would call the New Labour Party, which broke away from the Labour Party back in the 80s. And then also some former Green MPs supporting two of their candidates in the last election were Nandor Tansos, a former Green MP, and Sue Bradford, also a former Green MP. And their focus was mainly on the social justice side rather than the environment. So they were more comfortable in the Mana movement, which is more about looking after the vulnerable and the least advantaged in society. Interesting party too. Next one is the People's Party. I've checked out the website. I do remember hearing about them at the election. They had a reasonably small profile because they are a small party. But it's basically, as far as I could tell, it's Indians and Chinese who feel shut out. And they founded the NZ People's Party trying to focus and concentrate the vote of South Asian and East Asian immigrants who feel that they're just not represented in the current situation. There are Asian MPs in the parliament, but they tend to be very quiet. And a couple of them have had to resign for ethical reasons. So they just felt they wanted a fresh start, as far as I can tell. The Outdoor Party is your environmental party for your recreational hunters and fishers. I checked out their website. You might want to. It's kind of an interesting thing. They want to improve the water quality and the environment for the wildlife, basically, so they can go out and shoot it and fish it. So that's pretty much what they're about. Now those are the currently registered parties. I'm not going to talk about any others who are no longer registered. Okay. Just moving along to the next slide. I haven't got too many, so we'll get to the questions quick. This is the election result from September 23rd, 2017. The National Party got 44.4% of the vote, and they won 56 seats. So they are the largest party in the legislature. They had 41 local seats and 15 national seats or list seats. Now, next came Labour on 36.9% of the vote, which was amazing because 8 weeks out from the election, they were on 23%. And then the Labour leader resigned a little bit tearfully, but Andrew Little realized that he just wasn't doing it. And they brought in Jacinda Ardern, who really didn't want to be the Labour leader. But they said, please, and she did. And they turned around. She's a different character. You have to watch her for a little bit. She's got bandwidth to burn. She's got 100 issues in her head and deep level of detail on all of them. And she always knows what's going on up to the minute on everything. And to see a person like that operate just makes you feel small because you realize as smart as you think you are, there's somebody out there who's way smarter than you. So, and that's in the right environment, that is the sort of person who gets to the top of a political party. So as opposed to, if we look south of the border, it's not always the smartest people at the top, if I'm thinking of the US here. So so there we go, 36.9% of the vote, and very, very close, much closer than it was going to be. 29 local seats, 17 list seats, 46 total. New Zealand First, 7.2% of the vote. Their they were going great in the polls until Jacinda was made the leader, and they lost a lot of their votes to Labor. So they were 13, 14% in the polls, and on the day they ended up being half that because they lost it to Labor. And they ended up with 9 list seats. They have no local seats. Green Party, 6.3% of the vote. They were going at 14 or 15% until the female co-leader decided to announce that in the 1990s she had fraudulently claimed the benefit in order to survive. And she did so to highlight the plight of people who are disadvantaged and how they can't always be honest if they just want to survive. Well, the leader of a political party saying she broke the law didn't go down too well for most people, including a lot of Green Party members. And whatever the excuse, she had to resign. James Shaw, the male co-leader, then had to go into the election on his own. He didn't have time to pick a co-leader. And their support basically was cut in half, and they got 8 list seats, okay? So those 3 parties are in pink because they are the current government. Together, they have 63 seats. National Party, although it's the largest party, they were Nigel no-mates. They had nobody really to support them. They couldn't get to 61 MPs, which is the minimum you'd need to be the government in a 120-seat legislature. And so, yeah, there was a lot of aggrieved National Party people feeling they'd won the election because for some reason that party just, after 22 years, still hasn't quite got its head around MMP. So I don't know. It's going to be a while yet before they do. But anyway, the government has 63 seats, and Labour, New Zealand First, and the Greens. New Zealand First, Winston Peters has sharp elbows, so he's in a coalition with Labour. But the Greens were not allowed into the coalition because Winston Peters would not support that. So they are outside the coalition. But Jacinda Ardern and Labour got around that by just making some very important ministries outside cabinet and making it clear that, all right, they're outside cabinet because we have to do this, but these are important ministries. And the fact that they're outside cabinet is more of a technicality. But in theory, at the moment, if you add it up, you have the minority coalition of 46 plus 9 as 55 MPs, supported by the Greens with 8. Okay, so that's the government. Next, you can see that the top party got 2.4%. They came out of nowhere, and 2.4% is actually pretty good for out of nowhere, but they got no seats. Okay, they didn't win a local seat, and they didn't hit the 5%. The Maori Party got 1.2% of the vote. Not, I mean, they only ever got that much anyway, but they were able to win local seats in the Maori roll. This time they weren't, and they got wiped out, and all 7 Maori seats went back. I say back to Labour because the Maori seats were a Labour fiefdom for decades, like going back 100 years. So then we see the ACT Party, which is actually the Association of Citizens and Taxpayers. So very much focused on who's coming up with the money. And they got 0.5% of the vote, but they won 1 local seat. So they have a seat, whereas the other 2 parties above them with double and almost 5 times as many votes didn't get anything. So that highlights, whoops-a-daisy. Don't touch the mouse. And then the ALCP got 0.3%, and the Conservative Party 0.2%. Mana got 0.1%, People's Party 0.1%, and Outdoor 0.1%. Okay, and those were pretty much all the parties currently registered. There were some other parties there. There's one called Ban 1080 who want to ban a poison to kill possums because they believe it kills birds as well. And they've since been deregistered, but they got 0.1%. Just as I mentioned, okay. So MMP So Far, the next 2 screens are my last screens. They're sort of a potted history of what's happened. So 1993, MMP was adopted with 54% at a referendum. National had a 1-seat majority at the election which occurred at the same time. But once MMP was adopted, the political class, the politicians realized that, in fact, they didn't need to stay in the big tent parties anymore, and they could stake out their own political territory. And there was a bit of a rush to the center. There were 3 or 4 parties imagining themselves to be like the Free Democrats in Germany, who were perpetually in the center. able to choose the government. So the National began to fragment as they prepared for the first MMP election in 1996, and the government ended up by 1996 being a minority coalition. And of the 99 seats at that time, they went down to 41, whereas the majority on the night had been 50 seats. So they had a one-seat majority, and that was a term for Parliament where the Speaker of the House was actually an opposition MP. Peter Tapsell was a Labour MP from the Maori electorate, and he was the Speaker of the House so that the National Party could have a voting one-seat majority. Because if they made one of their own MPs the Speaker, then they wouldn't have a majority. They could have a tie every time there was a vote. So they got around that way, and that government ran the full term, even though it was a minority. People wanted time to prepare for that MMP election. So in 1996, the minority National Party-led government was the result, supported by New Zealand First. Winston Peters, he had 18 MPs off 13% of the vote, crashed through, absolutely, probably the largest result for one of the non-two major parties ever under MMP. He had ministers in cabinet and was deputy prime minister. And so most New Zealand First voters, though, however, had expected New Zealand First to support Labour. So he had a little problem there. Of his 13%, probably about 8 of them wanted him to go with Labour, and he went with National. And I remember at the time, within 2 months of that election, his polling was on 4%, and it stayed there. He never came back from that in that term. Even at the next election, they got 4.4%, and they only stayed in Parliament that election because he won his local seat in Tauranga by 67 votes. So he was just within 67 votes of oblivion, but he stayed in. But he's learned from that. He now understands better that MMP makes parties very accountable in a way that they aren't under first past the post, because usually in a first past the post election, it's take it or leave it. You have 2 choices at best, and in roughly half the seats, it's a safe seat anyway, and you don't have any choice at all. So MMP fundamentally changes that. And it's so important that however it's composed, open list, closed list, STV, MMP, I don't care how you do it, PR makes parties and politicians far more accountable because voters have more choice. That right there, that little second point, embodies a fundamental idea that don't get too hung up on the formulas, because at the end of the day, PR is going to be better however you put it together. Okay, so I'm going to bang on about a point. That's one. 1999, in that election, Labour formed a minority coalition government. There was a change of government from National to Labour. And that government, and from there, the government's run full term, 3 years. Labour's in power until 2008. There were a couple elections in there, which they were slowly losing it. But by 2008, the media tipped it the other way. And that's another little theme that perhaps we could mention, is that once a country goes to PR, or in fact, just in the modern era, you get a concentration of ownership in the media. It's the same media in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK particularly. It's owned by the same half a busload of people, and we're all getting the same message, and they all got the same crap to talk about MMP or PR, because they don't want it. They want the 39% government that they can give money to and own. And that's a problem we all face, whether it's British Columbia or Canada as a whole, or New Zealand or Australia or the UK. We're all facing this half a busload of people, old white guys, Rupert Murdoch, and that sort of person, who are basically propagandizing us. And if we buy their stuff, we're giving them our money to lie to us. And that's what got Labour out of power in 2008. The media had been banging on against them for several years. And anything they did that was good never got reported, and the bad stuff got amplified and exaggerated and outright misrepresented. So 2008, the National Party formed a minority government and remained in power until 2017 through 2 more elections. When they came into office, the Labour had paid down the government debt to about 10 billion, and by the time National was done last year, the debt was over 93 billion. So the Conservatives in New Zealand for the last 9 years have been tax cut and spend. So although they still will say don't vote for Labour or don't vote for the Greens, they're tax and spend. In fact, the history of New Zealand over the last 20 years is that it's the Labour governments that are fiscally responsible and the Conservative ones that give tax cuts to the rich and then just blow the budget through the window by spending on all sorts of stuff. So that's an interesting thing. So eventually, even though the media was so strongly in support of National Party last year, 2017, 53, 54% of voters ignored all that and went for New Zealand First, Labour, and the Greens collectively, and they were able to change the government. So that's an interesting development itself. It shows that over time people become somewhat immune to the propaganda, but it does take a while. All right. 2011, the second MMP referendum. National Party had promised a second referendum under the misapprehension that one had been promised at the outset and then not given. There never was a promise for a second referendum, but they were happy to lie and say there was. So they had the second referendum, and MMP won again with an increased majority. It was 57% instead of the 54% in 1993. And the other 43% basically is, you could call it Nationals core support. So for the National Party voters tend to not like MMP, that's pretty much monolithic, but everybody else loves it, and probably for good reason. So in the sense that if we still had first past the post, the 43% who vote for National would give them a majority in most elections, and it'd be like Canada, where the majority actually have no say in anything. So now that the majority in New Zealand actually have a say, no way are they going to give it up. All right. So 2017, National won the most seats, but they have no partners. So Labour form a minority coalition government with New Zealand First, supported by the Greens. The Greens get several ministries outside cabinet. They aren't part of the coalition, but it's first for the Greens. I've already mentioned that. Now, the problem for National, though, was, and I think I'll talk about this on the next screen. Yeah, this is more about general conclusions about MMP, so I'll leap off into that. So part of the promise of the referendum in 2011 was that National said,
Steve,
if MMP, yeah,
Steve,
yeah,
okay, it's 6 minutes after 4, so speed it up just a little
okay,
bit, okay?
all right,
So
yep,
we have
sure.
time for more discussion.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, then. Anyway, there was an electoral commission who was recommending that one seat threshold be removed because people could see it as basically a cheat. Because a major party steps aside and gives a seat to a minor party who in theory can then have bonus MPs for the major party. So it's one of the features voters really do not like, and the Electoral Commission recommended it be taken away, but nobody has enacted that. The 5% threshold's too high. There are only 3 parties that can consistently reach it: National, Labour, and the Greens. New Zealand First has missed it several times, and in fact, they disappeared entirely from Parliament for at least one term because they didn't have a local seat and they couldn't get to 4%. Now, small parties have also learned to avoid coalitions and prefer to support minority governments in return for policy concessions. The history there is that small parties fade in a coalition because they're small and they can't say much that's negative because they're bound by the convention of cabinet solidarity. So there's a list of parties who have faded or almost disappeared. United Future was the one that at one point they had 9 MPs. Now they're not even a registered party anymore. Maori Party had 7 MPs, and now they have none. ACT has 1. They used to have 9, I think, at one point. And New Zealand First is back from the dead for now. Okay. Then the next point is many voters learn their local first past the post vote is as worthless as it ever was. It's the party vote that really matters, and that's true for me. In a local seat in 22 years under MMP, I don't think I've ever elected an MP. It's just like the old days. The only vote that matters to me is the party vote. That's the one that lets me elect people. So although there's a strong focus on local representation, the reality is that under PR, those list MPs do probably an even better job than the local MPs in terms of representing the locality, but you don't know that until you've seen it. So a lot of people don't believe it, but it's real, okay? Small parties contest local seats mainly in order to attend public meetings at election time, because some people holding public meetings won't let you attend if you're not a local candidate. So they're on the roll, but they basically say, don't vote for me, vote for vote for the party, but support this other party locally, hoping to do the old strategic thing locally. And you can contact any MP you like, especially list MPs, because you don't have the situation like in Canada where an MP has an electorate and they only want to talk to the people in that electorate. Because almost half the parliament is like basically national MPs, you're able to talk to any of those because they don't necessarily have a defined piece of ground. Parties will assign them regions to cover and things like that, but the whole situation is a lot more flexible and fluid. And if I was going to summarize MMP or PR generally, it's just like step back, look at the big picture, don't get caught in the smoke and mirrors of Parliament every single day and who said what and he said, she said. Look at the policy outcomes over months and years and step back, and actually you'll see that the outcomes are better, the whole situation's better. Now, did I have another slide? No, I did not. So that's done. All right, go Anita. I'll change back. Or can you grab it back? Or no,
I
we're just,
probably can. Yeah, can you change it back? Can you change it
I'll
back to
do it.
me? I wanted to show one thing.
There you go.
All right.
And you can see the sun's up now.
Oh, let's see if this comes on here. When Steve was talking, he was going through all the different parties they have in New Zealand. And I just wanted to kind of make sure everybody gets the point that although there's a lot of choice, and I mean, we have that here too with the number of registered parties in Canada, with proportional representation that incorporates local representation like MMP or STV does, you don't see this explosion of so-called fringe parties that the opponents are always saying that you're going to see. So the evidence just doesn't bear that out. As you can see right now in New Zealand, there are 5 parties with seats, which is pretty much the same as we have in our federal legislature. Okay, so I wanted to take some of the questions people had. Somebody had asked, get off my slides here. Somebody had asked, why did the last 2 referendums fail? And they asked about the importance of government doing some public education. You want to take that, Steve? I can comment as well.
Which referendums are we talking about?
I think they're talking about the 2 in BC.
Oh, well, as far as I know, the referendums in BC were because the threshold was 60%. That first one, they won 76 out of 77 ridings for STV, and they got 57% of the vote. That is a crushing majority that should have seen BC using STV for years now. So that would be the main thing. You set the bar too high. And then the other thing would be, I guess, in Ontario, that information campaign that they had in 2007 that I was personally witness to because I was there for months working on the campaign, was a disgrace. It was I have never been able to see that party, the Liberal Party, the same again. That was absolute disgrace. The information was only intelligible if you already understood all about it. If you already knew what MMP was, it was like when they say, why, if you ask them, why would I want a car? And they go, well, a car has 4 wheels and a steering wheel, and it'll have air conditioning, and it has indicator lights for left and right. Yeah, but why would I want one? No, sorry, we're not allowed to say that. We're only allowed to describe it. And that was exactly what their information was. You wouldn't know why you wanted MMP, but all they did was just describe it without actually giving any information about why you'd want it. So that is where the public information campaign is critical. They can subvert it by just presenting incomplete and confusing information. So I don't know about the second BC referendum, because in theory, the first one should have still had an afterglow. But definitely the role of public information, if it's not done well, then it can be basically an atrocity.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, before the BC referendum, I did a little bit of research on referendums to help inform the recommendations from Fair Vote Canada BC we made a submission to the BC government and really looked at referendums around the world and the 8 electoral reform referendums that have been held in Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. And, the role of education, for sure. I mean, I think I think what Steve is getting at, the focus on mechanics rather than why would you do this, is a real problem. And I'm seeing it right now in the BC media, where we have a first question in the BC referendum, and that's about whether you want to adopt proportional representation. But most of the media outlets don't seem to be interested in talking about even that it's about 30% equals 30%, or why this might be a good idea, or how that compares to winner take all. What they want to do is try to describe in detail the three PR options on the second part of the question and say complicated as many times as they can fit in about 30 seconds. So we're kind of seeing a similar thing to what we saw in Ontario. Now, when you look at referendums, the research I found is the most important thing isn't trying to get millions of people to understand the mechanics of some system. The most important thing is political leadership. And that has been what's missing in almost every single referendum to date. You've had parties, the parties representing the majority, who are either opposed or they're neutral, or they're pretending to be neutral, but they're really opposed. And when people don't have a lot of information and they don't have time to sort through this, they'll look to opinion leaders and say, how does my party leader want me to vote? You know, how do the opinion leaders in the media, what are they saying about this? And they'll take that shortcut and make a decision based on that, which is really difficult if the party leaders and the media are not telling people what the referendum is really about. So I think that's a bigger reason for failure, compared to the government didn't properly put out enough videos on mechanics. That would be my take on that.
That sounds about right.
And in BC, Elections BC is supposed to do education, but I think it's up to us to explain beyond that neutral, you know, I'm Billy Ballot and here's where your ballot goes, and then you do this. Okay, it's up to us to get out there and talk to voters about why they would want this, because you won't get a presentation like this from Elections BC. Okay, other questions? Do you see one in there, Steve?
There was one further up about how premiers are chosen.
Okay.
If I was going to say that, it's the leader of the largest party tends to be the premier or the prime minister. And in the New Zealand case, the second largest party in the government, if it's a coalition, would tend to be the deputy prime minister. And then the major party would also have another one called the leader of the house or something like that, who is in effect the shadow deputy prime minister for the major party, who's leading the coalition. But in the current government in New Zealand, Winston Peters is the deputy prime minister, and an interesting situation just at the moment, because Jacinda Ardern, the prime minister, she's due to have her baby today. And I gather that they've got her scheduled in because she's 37 years old and it's her first baby. So I know they don't let them go much beyond their due date, from personal experience. And she's very likely to be induced tomorrow. So when she goes to hospital to have her baby, Winston Peters becomes the acting prime minister for 6 weeks. And that's an unprecedented situation here, probably elsewhere. I don't know too many Canadian prime ministers have had to take time off to have a baby. I doubt any of them. So that is an interesting thing. So he will be the acting prime minister for basically the next 6 weeks. And that is by agreement. Usually it's by agreement. I guess it's conceivable the leader of the second party could be the premier or the prime minister if everybody agreed. And I guess that's the important thing to understand about this is there aren't any hard rules. It's whatever people agree to. And that can be liberating. And for some people, that's a scary thing. They don't know. They're uncertain. But I like the idea that people with the same values can get together and have a conversation and work out what's the best way to give life to the choices the voters made in terms of policy and values. So that's the short answer to that. Any comment, Anita?
Yeah, I mean, kind of tagging on to that, one of the things that we are reading in the media constantly is that PR is going to allow the tail to wag the dog. So the small party, and they're pointing to New Zealand First, and inventing a story where New Zealand First has all these crazy alt-right policies, and, you know, because they have all the control and just get to, you know, force the government to do whatever they want. It's really, that's the gist of what we're hearing. And, you know, when I read articles on the negotiations between Labour and New Zealand First, really, New Zealand First didn't get much. And what they got was what the other parties were mainly in agreement on. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that tail wags the dog thing.
Well, look, honestly, my story on that has been that it's complete and utter crap. It comes from the German situation where they had the 5% threshold and they only ever got 3 parties in. So the Free Democrats were able to decide whether it was going to be the Christian Democrats or the Social Democrats who were the government. But that's only one PR system. Virtually all the others have far more parties and lower thresholds. And so the reality of proportional representation is that if you don't set the threshold too high, it ends up being the dog deciding which tail to wag. And because on a particular issue, Party A might not want to cooperate, but Party B probably go along for the ride in terms of supporting it in return for some concession on a policy they are interested in. And that's what Helen Clark did through her 2 terms, and to some extent the National Party did during its period as well, is just if the usual partners won't support what you want, you look elsewhere and try and find a parliamentary majority. And my goodness, sounds a lot like democracy. Holy crap, who would have thought? But that's actually what happens. When they say the tail wags the dog, just say, nah, this dog has 5 tails and she gets to choose which tail to wag. That's the reality of it.
All right. So somebody wants to know, what are New Zealanders' biggest gripes about proportional representation?
Oh, that's an easy one. It's all the same misconceptions that you're reading in BC newspapers right now. List MPs aren't elected and all that stuff. There's still people around 22 years later don't realize how MMP works. And I guess there's no cure for stupid. I'm sorry, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. If people are dumb, a lot of them just insist on staying dumb. For me, I mean, I've been a Green Party voter for most of the time. So when the Green Party guys get in, they don't win any local. They've only ever won a local seat once. And generally they're all list MPs, and they're doing an awesome job. And as a Green Party voter, I feel absolutely totally represented. So the people this argument usually comes from tend to be, I'm sorry, but I'll use the word conservative because that's where they come from. And they just don't get the whole thing about the list MPs are actually elected by the party vote. They are elected as a group in the same way that under STV you might have multi-members. Okay, you get to choose them individually, and I understand that even if Canada had MMP, it would be open lists, so people would still be able to mark a preference for people on the list. So I guess that addresses that concern. I guess my issue is after 22 years of MMP in New Zealand, for me it's not a concern. I don't care. The parties all pick good candidates. Whether I support their values or not is another matter. But there are very, very few duds in the crowd of people who actually got elected. So closed list, open list, I don't care. PR is going to be better. But that is a very important idea there. Yeah.
Okay.
He said. Hopefully I answered the question. Sunday morning, Anita. Did I get there? Oh yeah. No, the rest of it. Yeah. Look, I didn't enumerate them individually, but yes, there are people who don't like MMP for just those reasons. They don't like the whole idea that one party, basically, they don't like the idea that one party can't run everything all by itself on 40% of the vote. That's it. They don't like it, and you can't reason with them. You can't rationalize with them. They don't care. And they'll just say it over and over and over, and probably until they go cold in the ground. But the fact is, people like me love this stuff, and the fact that I always have a vote that counts. Guys like that, people like that who don't like MMP, they don't care if your vote counts. They just want their team to be running things, and the 60% of voters have no say. They don't care. They just don't care. So yeah, that's what it boils down to. So there's not really a lot of ground for talking about it. Winston Peters, by the way, just people love to play up Winston Peters, and he's clever himself about, and this whole alt-right business is absolute rubbish. What he is the party name just says it all, New Zealand First. So when he says he's anti-immigration, well, all right, what's he talking about? He's talking about governments bringing in skilled people from overseas and investing nothing in training local people to do the same jobs. So National Party in 1990s abolished apprenticeships in plumbing, electricians, builders. There were no apprenticeships, no apprentices. So it was cheaper to bring them in from the UK or Canada or wherever than to train local people. So you ended up with an entire generation of tradespeople in New Zealand who were all imported, and they're virtually, the legacy crowd from the years before. And that went on. And that's part of what gave rise to this whole anti-immigration thing, was the fact that it, it was being used to save money on educating local people, in part. And also, when you bring people in, they tend to vote for you. So there's also that subtle gerrymandering thing going on there. But that's kind of what gave rise to New Zealand First's anti-immigration thing. They're concerned about the ethical backgrounds of some of the people who come in and then end up getting deported because they're corrupt. They're concerned about all those issues, organized crime. They're concerned about importation of drugs from countries. Won't name any, but I think we probably know which one it is. And there are all those things. So if you dig into the actual detail of what New Zealand First is talking about, those are actually real concerns for Canadians as well. And that's why he gets the vote share he does. But definitely he says some colorful stuff, and definitely it's played way up. But you'll notice, since they've been in power, he's pretty quiet, and that's been the record for Winston Peters. He's a flaming brand when he's running for office, and then you get him in there and he's a pussycat and he just purrs. Okay.
All right. Steve, we have another question. Somebody asking basically, how do we effectively counter what you call the half bus load of older white people and their propaganda machine? How do you deal with the media when the media is largely offside? And can you reflect maybe on the New Zealand referendum and how that played out there compared to today?
Well, the New Zealand media background then was quite a bit different, but I think it'd be harder today. But I guess the only thing we can really do is do the grassroots stuff. Unless someone's out there, anybody listening has $1 billion, go buy yourself a newspaper, please, now. But you can go. The only way to counter it is to go grassroots, face to face, talk to people engage the civil society groups. But the hardest thing is to penetrate that great mass of people who don't listen to anything, that's hard. But my feeling on this now is that it wouldn't hurt to have when someone has a particularly egregious column or article that's so far from reality that it's stupid, it wouldn't hurt to have 200 people turn up in placards outside the newspaper calling them out on it as a visual representation of people unhappy about being BS'd into the ground. Okay. The other thing as a practical political measure would be that as soon as we get MMP, or as soon as you get PR, whatever form it is, call for a royal commission on concentration of media ownership. I think that's really important. This is the next issue we need to address, because if the government isn't allowed to spend money promoting its policies because that's propaganda, and the only people who have the ability to promote things widely are the 5 billionaires who want to tell you what to think for their benefit, that's another lose-lose situation. So this whole idea of government being bad, as long as it's got some integrity, I don't have any problem with government providing citizens with information at my cost. That's what their job is. So and in fact, that's really the only counter to private propaganda, is to have some either privately funded good information, but there don't seem to be a lot of billionaires in favor of that. Alternatively, the only way people like us can have any influence is through government, and that a royal commission or some kind of commission into media concentration would be a damn fine idea, at least to make them sit up and pay attention and understand that there's a bit of a threat to their hegemony on information.
Okay, so just to wind back a bit, because I think that's something that I hear from people all the time, that aside from proportional representation, the concentration of ownership in the media is a huge problem. But for where we are right at this particular second in time, we can't do anything about that. So what we can do is what Steve started with, which is we need to get out the vote. That's the only way we're going to win this, is by engaging large numbers of people and calling them up on the phone and getting them to mail back their ballot on October 22nd in BC. So yeah, that's where there's not a huge campaign to go knocking on doors for first past the post. So, I mean, I'll be
No.
interested to see. I got an email from the BC Liberals the other day. It says, join your local team to campaign against proportional representation. I haven't seen these teams yet. I have seen paid advertisements against PR, but I haven't seen the people knocking on doors. So I think that's where we have the advantage if we're willing to put in the time and really mobilize.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Yeah, that's right.
No, people are reserved. They're shy, and it's once you get out, and by the time you've knocked on your 10th door, it's all over. But you got to knock on the first 10. Yeah.
Um, let's see. Is that, I don't think I've missed anybody. I'm wondering though, Steve, if you can briefly comment on the idea of local representation, because that's a huge thing that the opponents are talking about, you know, in with our proportional models, they wouldn't be like New Zealand. It wouldn't be countrywide. It wouldn't be province-wide. It would be all regional. So the, you know, the regional MLAs, which, you know, list MLAs, but really regional MLAs, you know, are all tied to a certain area. But can you speak to your experience of local representation and whether it changed when you got PR?
Yeah. I understand the parochial impulse, and in Canada, it's particularly strong. I see it as kind of the enemy of democracy and the enemy of a lot of things. I used to sign up for it, but I don't anymore. I think parochialism almost betrays a lack of imagination and a failure of vision. Are you Canadian or are you from Peterborough? I mean, figure it out. Your local government, your city council is Peterborough. Vote for them. They do your local thing. Ontario, great. You've got an MPP who represents your local area for a lot of really important stuff, transport, education. So federally, I mean, I could see scope for getting rid of parochialism altogether and not having any local MPs. My experience in New Zealand is that with the big parties, they will have local seats and they will have offices locally. When the minor parties have numbers sufficient to make it possible, they also open local offices. I have had a local Green Party office and a local New Zealand First office in the area in the past. This most recent election, because New Zealand First got 8 and the 9 and the Greens got 8, I've seen those local offices disappear simply because New Zealand's, I don't know, 1,500, almost 2,000 kilometers long and 4.5 million people, and they've got 8 MPs in the Green Party, for example, and probably half of those are now cabinet ministers, if not more, and they would really struggle on the ground to be local representatives just in terms of time. Julianne Genter, who's the minister of a couple of portfolios in the government. She's a Green Party member, and she's associate minister of a couple of very big portfolios in association with the Labour minister. She's also about 4 weeks off having a baby. So there's all kinds of stuff going on there. So the local representation side of it, from a multi-party point of view, improves when you've got more MPs in the smaller parties. But even so, locally, if I was looking at a website last night, and my local MP is a National Party MP. The National Party always wins in this part of town because it's a wealthier part of town. But if I go to the Labour Party website, they've got a name there of somebody I can contact if I want to talk to somebody from Labour. Similarly, the Greens seem to have pointed out that if you need to talk to somebody in the Greens, they have regional co-conveners who aren't elected people, but they are office holders in the party, and if you need to talk to them, they'll convey it up to the council and then through to the MPs. So there are mechanisms there. Parties are coping as best they can with the resources they have available. But certainly, as I said before, the parties I tend to vote for only have list MPs, and I've never been unhappy with their performance. So, but it's this kind of thing, you don't know it till you know it, and I tell people, you know, look, honestly, list or local, after the election, a week after the election, you can't tell the difference. They're down the local market promoting their party and their values with their stalls or doing whatever they're doing, and you wouldn't know who was local and who wasn't. And until you see it, yeah, that's really hard for a lot of people to believe because, and I think it's because all of their political assumptions, a guy like me, my age, I'll be 60 in 3 weeks or whatever, you get assumptions and and things you believe based on your experience, and it's hard to decide which ones to shed when you go to a new system and which ones to keep. And a lot of this stuff about party hacks and party leaders appointing people to the lists and all this. That's what happens now. That's what first past the post is. That's what carpetbaggers are. So all those things you believe that are bad about PR, in fact, PR liberates you from those things because you don't have to vote for the carpetbagger. You can vote for the Green Party or some other party, and your vote will actually elect people. And those people will be accessible to you, especially if you have any activism in the party at all. They know you're a member. I mean, now, regionally, locally, I guess it'd be hard with 30 million people in Canada. But in terms of the whole regional breakdown for me in Canada, some of the models proposed, I just see them as risky, potentially as the potential for gerrymandering. If you make your regional areas a bit better represented, well, who does better representation in regional areas tend to favor? And you don't have to think too hard about that. It ends up being a gerrymander, and I don't think it's necessary is my sentiment, based on the experience I've had, that people do work to represent their party, because if they don't, you won't vote for them, and you now have choice. And that's the fundamental thing that's so hard to get across, is when you really have choice, parties are more responsive and they pay more attention there.
I think that's the key thing, and I will never forget listening to the Federal Electoral Reform Committee meetings, and they had the experts on from Ireland where they have single transferable vote and you elect 3 to 5 local representatives. And the one Liberal MP was just, she was like, but can't voters, then they can go MP shopping, you know? Like,
Yeah, like
this
that's a
was
bad thing.
real, this was a real problem that you could call up, if you didn't like what she had to say, you could call up somebody that you actually helped elect in your local district or your local region, and you could go see them and see whether you could get, some connection there or some advocacy on your issue. I mean, and
Yeah,
that's
give
really
me some of that.
that's the disconnect really between politicians and people around this issue right there. Somebody wants to know, how do you answer those who say PR means the populous areas, the big cities, will decide the election and rural voters will be disenfranchised?
Well, everybody's got a vote of equal value. If 10% of the population is rural and 90% are urban, I don't know how you can fiddle the system to make that otherwise. I mean, democracy is one vote, one person. If you want a rural hegemony over the cities, well, then you don't want democracy. You want something else. You want to go find a dictator from a farm somewhere. And I guess that's the only answer I've got. You have to make up your mind. Are you a Democrat or aren't you? And at the end of the day, you will be represented in Parliament, and if it's serious enough, I guess you could set up a rural or country party. Like in Australia, they have the National Party, which tends to be rural farmer-based party. It's a conservative party, and they're in permanent coalition with the Liberal Party. They don't have PR. They've been in permanent coalition since 1915, over 100 years. But the National Party are there to represent the interests of rural people more strongly than the Liberals, who are much more urban. And I guess you could see a similar situation arise in Ontario or Canada or whatever jurisdiction where the balance of power could well be held by a party with a strong rural influence or a strong rural flavor, so that although you aren't able to dominate, and that seems to be the thing that if people are worried about, first past the post, if you're not able to dominate and dictate, then somehow you're on your back with your legs in the air. You're not. You still have influence, and you'll still be consulted. And the people in the cities won't dictate to the country people, as long as the country people don't rule themselves out by not being able to negotiate and compromise. Because, I mean, you can end up being Nigel No Mates if you can't work well with others. And I guess that you have to decide, are you able to negotiate and cooperate or not? The saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee, to me, was something that a little would-be dictator would say after they went to a meeting and they didn't get their way. And people who say that, and I kind of look twice at them and think, okay, I'm not inviting you to a committee meeting because you'll just disrupt everything. So I mean, that's an important thing. You know, if you're in a situation where you aren't able to dominate, you have to learn to cooperate. And there's no way to sugarcoat that, whether you're city or rural. It's true for everyone. We all got a vote of equal value, hopefully.
So I'd like to answer that too, because I think part of what the person's asking is this myth that's being put around by some of the opponents in BC, basically saying that all the rural and interior seats, half of them are going to disappear and they're all going to move to Vancouver, and then all of Vancouver is going to have all the power. And I just want to reiterate that in the Attorney General's report, it says no region will lose MLAs.
Yeah, that's important.
It's very, it doesn't, PR doesn't shift the balance of power from the rural to the urban or the urban to the rural. And they've pretty much solidified that by saying that if you have 10 MLAs in your region now, when we have PR, you'll have 10 MLAs in your region. That's not changing. None of them are moving. Nobody's losing representation. What's going to be different is that within that region, you'll have a diversity of representation. So right now you have a situation in BC where the BC Liberal Party wins most of the interior and northern ridings, and the BC Liberal Party is not in the government. Therefore, you know, a whole bunch of regions basically have very little say in government policy because of first past the post, even though something like 40 or 45% of people in those regions vote for other parties. The BC Liberals won every single seat, which means that a region is effectively shut out. So PR fixes that. It means that every region reflects diversity. Just like in Vancouver, we're going to see probably more BC Liberal MLAs elected. So it's not just like an NDP zone there. So it's going to strengthen regional representation, because no matter what region you're in, you're going to have MLAs in the government and you're going to have MLAs in the opposition. So I guess that would
Yeah,
be.
sorry, I was a bit off message there, Anita, but that's a very good point and very relevant to BC, that nobody is losing representation. It just becomes more diverse. And that's an aspect I didn't play up, but it's absolutely a very important consideration. So yeah, thank you for putting that in there.
It's both just two different perspectives on the same thing. So
Yep.
somebody's asking, you say, don't get caught up in the details of PR, but it's on the ballot, and people say they'll just stay with the status quo because the choices are too complex, which is not untrue. There are very good YouTube descriptions on some kind of PR, but the three on the ballot need to be clarified to make choosing the kind doable. Is Fair Vote Canada able to create them? Well, Elections BC is going to do the public education. So from a Fair Vote we are a small grassroots citizens campaign, and we have a lot of videos now. Of course, like you said, you know, we've got STV videos, we've got MMP videos, but guess what? We don't have the exact ones that are on the ballot now, which are variations of STV and MMP. So whether we will create videos on those systems, I don't know. I think what we will do most likely is wait to see what Elections BC comes out with and see, and if it's good, simple explanations of the systems, which really aren't that complicated for voters, then we will use that. And if it's a fail, then we may have to look at creating something. But overall, the way we're approaching this referendum is it's a question of principle. All three systems on the ballot, basically the opponents want to play up the differences, mainly so that people get confused and overwhelmed, but really they all meet the same criteria. You're going to have local MLAs, you're going to have proportional results, no region's going to lose MLAs, you're going to have more voter choice, and they're all, in practice, it's not going to make a huge difference. So we're pretty happy to let people rank the three however they like and not spend a lot of time digging into the weeds of it, just making sure that information is available for people that really want to dig in and find out what the exact differences are.
And if I could just add that in terms of complexity, the simplest way to express anything is just to say how you vote. And that's where something like MMP or STV are pretty straightforward in the sense that there might be 5 or 7 people who will be elected in STV, and you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you know who they are and you've done your homework, there's nothing even remotely confusing about that. The people who get confused are the people who don't think about it and never pay any attention. They're easily confused. But MMP is even simpler in its New Zealand form anyway. You've got one local person to pick, and then you pick one party, and then they count up all the votes for the parties and allocate the seats in proportion. The outcome, if you're worried about the complexity of outcome, PR is by far simpler. If you get 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the seats. That's so simple. It's first past the post where you might get 40% of this vote and 60% of the seats, or 40% of the seats, or it depends on what the votes the other party got. If you got 40% of the vote, you might get no seats at all because the other party got 60. So first past the post is the one that's outrageously complicated. You've got no idea what's coming out of that black box. Whereas PR, 10% of the vote is 10% of the seats. And so there's two things. The results are simple. The result is in proportion to the votes gained. And then the actual voting itself usually is outrageously simple. If you want to go for open lists and decide to preferentially mark everybody on the list because you know all 478 candidates in your area, no problem. You go ahead and do that. But I'm sure there'd be an option there that says, yeah, you know what? I just want to support that party, and I'll tick that slate. And because that's what a lot of the STV votes do too. You can get in there and fiddle around with individuals, but or you can just put a tick at the top and go and then accept whatever they presented. Most voters do that. So as long as you can cater for that, that keeps it simple too. So yeah, simple outcomes and simple to vote. Those are two key strengths of proportional systems. So anyone who says otherwise isn't really being honest about how outrageously complex first past the post is in terms of working out what the outcomes are going to be.
First past the post is complex in that people struggle with how to vote, like we saw in Ontario. People just, they don't know if they can vote for who they want to vote for. They don't know what their local polling is. They don't know who the strategic vote is. They don't know, it gets really complicated for voters, even though marking 1X isn't complicated. PR is more straightforward. You can vote for, vote for who you want, and you know that you'll be represented in proportion to the support that party got. So it actually is simpler. And I would encourage you too to look on our website, fairvote.ca, and if you want to see the BC in particular, there's a BC part of our website, and we have sample ballots for the general sample ballots for the 3 systems that will be on the referendum in BC. And I find a sample ballot is the easiest way, because then it's less intimidating. And just to correct a little bit of what Steve's saying, he's kind of joking there about 400 candidates, but seriously, I mean, one of the opponents in BC really did just get on news and say you were gonna have to rank 40 people, and that's just not true. It's a total misrepresentation of the truth. Okay, we're not going to say a lie. Okay, we're going to say it's not true. If you have a regional vote, you might be looking at 8 or 10 people, and if it's an open list, you pick one. Just mark an X, go home. It's nothing to do with having. It's nothing to do with having to know who 400 people are. You know who the person you want to vote for is, or the party, and it's just that simple.
My comment was based on the New Zealand ones where we have national lists, and the lists tend to have about 50 or 60 names on them, and then there's 9 parties. So if you really wanted to get in and fiddle around on the lists, on open lists, there would be 400 or 500 people. But as you say, there's no model in Canada where that is offered or considered, and that all the Canadian models involve regional. So the numbers to be sorted through would be much, much smaller. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and the important thing to know too about regional MMP is that when you see this list and the opponents are saying, where do these people come from? Are they some kind of party hack or whatever? They're the same people that are running in the local ridings, but they're on the list. So they're not somebody that came out of a party backroom strategy session or something. They're Joe Doe who's running on your local riding is also on the list. And that way, if he doesn't win the popularity contest with first past the post ballot, but he's still sufficiently popular, then he might fill a regional seat so those voters have representation. It's all very transparent, I guess.
Was that in Ontario where they had the 20 PC MP candidates who paid $20,000 each to get their selection meetings rigged?
Yeah, a lot of allegations back.
Was that not true? I don't know. I saw the story. I don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah, a lot of stuff about Doug Ford. Unfortunately, I don't think it I'm not sure how many minds that actually changed. Anyway,
No.
okay. So we think we've gone through all the questions. I will be sending out an email to people as usual about a day or 2 days after this webinar with slide decks for anybody who wants to see that. Usually people want to see some of the slides. All these pictures are up on our Facebook page and stuff like this. So feel free to follow us on Facebook and on Twitter, and you'll see all the same kind of stuff. And if you have questions, you can email that we didn't answer that you thought of later, you can email us and ask us. Happy to answer anything. Yeah, and suggestions for future webinars are always welcome. Oh, and of course, please get involved. Please get involved. Go on fairvote.ca, click the get involved thing, fill out the form, and you'll hear from me. And probably I'm running a little behind on them right now, but maybe about 5 days you'll hear from me, and it's just that simple. And please do support us financially as well. We rely only on individuals. There's no governments that want to support us, as you can imagine. There's no corporations that are writing us checks, as you can imagine. It's all individuals, and we need your support to help win this referendum.
And also Prince Edward Island too. They're having a referendum this year as well, and they're going to especially need support because the government there appears to have made it almost illegal to campaign for anything. So
yeah, that's a whole webinar on its own on the PEI mess. Anyway, okay, thank you very much everyone for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you either in person or on the email. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Steve.
Bye.